Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at the 14th Salem Literary Festival. I'm Diane Stern, a member of the hardworking team of volunteers and Salem Athenaeum and Salem Public Library staff who bring you this festival each year. I'm very pleased to introduce this session in conversation with Laura Zigman and Adrienne Brodeur. And some folks have been going to the desk and saying, well, what's the subject? If they haven't read the book, I would say it's about fraught relationships, sibling relationships, and we know how sticky they can be, and a lot of other things thrown in. The books were wonderful, and just on a personal note, when I read these two authors' books, I feel like I'm in such good hands. It's not going to go astray, it's not going to be lame, it's worth the time and investment. And I thank you so much for being here. Laura Zigman is the author of 5 novels, Separation Anxiety, which was just optioned by Julianne Nicholson. She's an actor, and she's from Medford. And the production company Whip is for a limited TV series. Animal Husbandry was already made into a movie, which was titled Someone Like You, with Hugh Jackman. Dating Big Bird, Her, and Piece of Work. She has ghostwritten, collaborated on works of nonfiction, including Eddie Izzard's New York Times bestseller, Believe Me. She's been a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Huffington Post. Laura lives nearby in Cambridge with her son and deeply human Sheltie, and if you have read Separation Anxiety, you know what we're talking about. Her 6th novel, Small World, was published in January, and we'll be discussing that one today. Adrienne Brodeur began her career in publishing as the co-founder with filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola of the national magazine award-winning Zoetrope. Correct? Okay. All Story. She's worked as a book editor and is currently executive director of Aspen Words, a literary arts nonprofit at the Aspen Institute. She is the author of the best-selling memoir, Wild Game, My Mother, Her Secret, and Me. Her latest novel is Little Monsters, and she's been signing books up there. That was published in June, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome, Adrienne and Laura. I don't know who wants to begin, but it's fine with us either way.
We flipped a coin.
Oh, you did?
Thank you, Diane. I recently had drinks with someone from WGBH, and she apologized ahead of time. She said, you know, I'm a journalist, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I said, no, I'm super nosy. I will be asking you more questions. So I listened to Adrienne, we'll probably ask more questions than I should. But anyway, we want to both thank the Salem Literary Festival and Diane, especially, and all the volunteers. We're thrilled to be here. I've been a fan of Adrienne's for a long time. I loved Wild Game. I loved it like everybody else. And then this came, and I was late in reading it because I was busy. But
with your book?
With my own book. Not that good. But I loved this novel too, and I kind of delighted in the fact that you picked us both because small, little monsters.
Not to mention siblings.
Not to mention siblings. So I really look forward to the conversation that we'll have, and I assume we'll take questions if there are questions.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So we thought we would start with, I'm going to ask Adrienne if she would read a little passage. If you want to describe the book, and then read a little passage, and then I'll do the same, and then we'll just get into it.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Everything she said, thank you, Salem Literary Festival and Diane. So, for those of you who have read Wild Game, you know that I'm obsessed with family secrets, so it will come as no surprise that secrets loom large in Little Monsters, which just briefly, let's see, it's set on Cape Cod, it's set in 2016, and it follows the Gardner family, which is a very small family, a father and his 2 adult children. The mother died long ago. And at the onset of the novel, things just seem to be going great for this family. The Adam Gardner, the patriarch, is about to turn 70. He is on the brink of this epic scientific discovery and about to crack the code of whale language. His adult son, Ken, who's 41, has just sealed a real estate deal that's kind of catapulted him into a new stratosphere of wealth, and which is going to enable him to run for Congress, and he's really interested in amassing power. And the daughter, Abby, who's 38, has finally found her voice as an artist and is about to be discovered in a big way. But as we know in books, as in life, nothing is ever as it seems. So you quickly discover sort of all the things that are kind of falling apart and how the ground is shifting. So I'm going to read, the book is told from multiple points of view, and I'm going to read a very brief passage from the beginning, but not the very beginning, told from Adam, the patriarch's perspective. And the only thing you need to know that you probably don't know about him yet is that he's got bipolar disorder, and at the beginning of the book, he's entering a manic cycle. To his credit, at the onset of this latest bout of insomnia, Adam followed protocol and made an appointment at the clinic in Hyannis, knowing full well what to expect. A blood draw, a barrage of questions, an adjustment of medication. What he hadn't expected was that the doctor who'd been treating him for the last 3 decades had retired. Why Dr. Peabody hadn't bothered to inform him directly was beyond him. 30 years was, well, a very long time. Adam pointed out the oversight to the front desk clerk, a busty young woman with blue fingernails, who assured him an email had been sent to all patients the previous month. Had he thought to check his junk folder, she asked, clicking together her talons. Adam started to answer, but held his tongue. Who but an idiot would bother to check a junk folder? He followed her down the hall to the exam room, still puzzling over why his longtime doctor, at least 5 years his junior, would have retired. To do what? In Peabody's place, a kid half Adam's age, outfitted in tight pants and alarmingly bright orange socks, strode into the exam room. Was it too much to ask that the person evaluating his mental state have at least one gray hair on his head? The new doctor acknowledged Adam only cursorily, opting to study his electronic patient chart first. Mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was the doctor's lecture on sleep hygiene. For the love of God, why not just call a thing? Passed away, big bone. What was so wrong with dead and fat? Euphemisms were I like reading next to her. Euphemisms were tools of the feeble-minded. Hygiene brought to mind feminine products, something Adam did not wish to contemplate. But that led him to think about parts of the female anatomy he did like to contemplate. Stay focused, he reminded himself, and took notice of the boy's weak chin. I don't think we've had the pleasure of a proper introduction, Adam said, cutting the lecture short. I'm Dr. Gardner. In his lifetime, Adam Gardner, PhD, had had an acclaimed career as a research scientist for the Cape Cod Institute of Oceanography, CCIO to those in the know. His glory days were in the late 1970s when, as a young scientist, he was part of a team that disproved once and for all the notion that life could be sustained only by a photosynthesis-based food chain. In the pitch-black depths of the Pacific Ocean north of the Galapagos Islands, they'd encountered evidence in the form of foot-long clams, giant red tube worms, and spiny white crabs that even in darkness there was life. Adam and his team discovered and named more than 24 species. In the decades since those early successes, he'd become one of the foremost experts on cetacean biology, studying the population dynamics and communication of humpback whales. Beyond these professional accomplishments, he was a Vietnam veteran who had single-handedly raised his 2 children after his beloved first wife, Emily, died suddenly at the age of 30. In short, he wasn't about to let some kid outrank him.
So, Small World is a novel about two adult, divorced, childless sisters who move in together after living apart on opposite coasts for a long time. One lives in Cambridge, and the other sister is coming from Los Angeles and hasn't lived on the East Coast for a long time. And this is a book that is based a little bit on my own personal family story. I had a sister who died when she was 7. She was my parents' firstborn daughter. She was born in 1958 with a really rare bone disease, and she lived most of her life at Fernald. And so I have an older sister who's 2 years older than me, who lives in Los Angeles. And in our family, our sister lived at Fernald from the time she was about 2 till she died there at 7 in the mid-60s. And it was one of those things where everything happened off stage in terms of we didn't really know her. And the shadow of grief we lived in was really my parents. And so while we're going to talk about memoir and fiction and all that, but this is a sort of a story I always wanted to tell in a way. I think that everyone has a story that you feel if you could just tell people your story, they would understand why you're so weird. And I felt like when I started writing, I was like, okay, this is maybe going to try to explain why I am, why our family, why we are the way we are, why my sister. But I'm going to read a brief passage from the beginning, but not the first page. And this is when Lydia.
We're like sisters. We're like writing sisters.
Go like that. So this is when Lydia, who was in Cambridge, is picking up. Joyce is picking up Lydia. Lydia is landing from Los Angeles when she first moves to Cambridge. It's a gray January afternoon when I pick Lydia up from the airport, the kind of day that always reminds me of how hard it is to live here on the East Coast in New England. When, in the cold, wet shock of air in the open parking garage, she says about the weather, "Nice, great, I've really missed this." I resist the urge to apologize for it, even though it still feels like my fault. This freezing cold welcome home, a bracing slap across the face, which I can't help but think she kind of deserves for leaving me alone here for so long. She has 2 bags to carry on in a silver metal case that she checked, and when I put them in the trunk, I compliment her on her light packing job. Everything else is in storage, she says, pulling a thin, bright orange puffer jacket out of her carry-on for the ride home. Brad was kind enough to offer to ship it once I get settled. That was nice of Brad, I say, wasn't it? But then Brad's always been a nice person, she says, much nicer than me. It occurs to me then that Brad was my brother-in-law for almost 20 years, and yet I have no idea how true that statement is. Who is Brad? Who is Lydia? Living so far from each other made it almost impossible to know, and now it doesn't even matter. Divorce makes the past irrelevant. He's gone, and she's here now for the first time in years, probably since Louise's funeral 5 years ago. We're both in the same car, heading home. I take the scenic route back from the airport, making sure to take Sparrow Drive and Memorial Drive so that Lydia can see what she's missed all these years. The sexy curve of the Charles River, the runners snaking alongside it despite the cold, the indigo sky, a color and texture only Van Gogh or Turner could mix. I park on the street in front of my apartment on the first floor of Midnight Blue, Victorian on a leafy street not far from Harvard Square, and on the way to the house she stops, resting her bag on the brick sidewalk. She stares up at the sky and takes in a long, deep, cold breath, then exhales it in a big gray cloud. All the trees are bare, and the tiny bit of light that guided us home from the airport is fading fast. Winter, she says softly, reverentially, looking at me over her shoulder with an unusually sweet smile. Somewhere nearby, someone's fireplace is lit, and we can both smell it. I've kind of missed it. For a second, I step outside myself. My sister, who has not lived here in decades, is finally back on her way to my apartment, where the 2 of us are about to be roommates for a while. Suddenly, too late, I'm terrified. This could be a disaster. It likely will be a disaster. All the old wounds of childhood and beyond will definitely resurface, and then we'll fight, and then we'll be stuck together in the same house for who knows how long, and then she'll leave, and it will end badly, really badly. So badly that we might never talk to each other again after that. Whose idea was this? I don't believe you missed it. I said I kind of missed it, she said, not that I really missed it. She pulls on her bag and follows me up the walk and inside the vestibule. As I lead the way, I think I hear her say, "I'm so excited to see your place again." But part of me is certain, I imagine no.
I loved Small World so much, and I actually just listened to it again a few days ago because I had read it the first time, and for some reason there are so many overlaps between our subject matter and oddly our lives, but I loved these two women, I mean all the characters, but these two sisters in particular, and what I loved about them is what I aspire to do in my own fiction, which is there's not a hero or a villain. They're both deeply complicated women. And do you want to talk at all about sort of how you develop characters or what you think about?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think when you're a female fiction writer, there's this pressure to make really likable characters. And I was going to ask you about Ken. But especially when you're female writing women characters, there's this, like I said, a pressure to make them super likable, and that's just not interesting. And it's also not real. I mean, the people we know in our lives, especially our siblings if we have them, or our families, it's not black and white. I mean, sometimes it's black and white, but most of the time it's very gray. And so I loved writing about these two sisters who are sort of based on my sister and me, but very not really based on us. I mean, my sister Linda, who was on the, certain little similarities, but she's much more sociable than Lydia is in the book. But these two are very, they're very odd. I mean, Lydia is more odd than Joyce, but when they're together after so long of never having really lived together since they were children, it seemed like such a great way to explore the past. And so at first when I started to write this book, it was during the pandemic. I too had been sent home from my book tour in March 2020. And my husband and son and dog and I were all stuck together in the apartment, and we had these neighbors upstairs. I live in Cambridge in a house. We rent a unit in a house, and upstairs were people that had moved in. And they had moved in 2 years prior, and they had moved in, and we thought like, oh, they're kind of nice, and then they sort of took a month to move in, and then all of a sudden there was all this noise, and we didn't know what the noise was, and it turned out they had built a yoga studio above the pets. And so if you've read the book or not read the book, there's the same thing. The two sisters are living there, and their relationship sort of plays out with how they deal with these annoying neighbors. And at first when I started the book, I thought it would be dark comedy about these annoying neighbors who have an illegal business above our living room. But it turned out that I didn't want to do it in terms of a couple living there and a family. I thought, what about the sisters? And the idea of exploring siblings, especially siblings who would then have their relationship play out. And I knew exactly how my sister, my real sister, would want to take the yoga classes just to get at me. So there was all that, but in that time and in that place of being stuck together as sisters with this annoying thing happening, they would revisit their childhood. So and they had a sister who died, different circumstances. But yeah. And you, too.
You're talking about in Ken being...
Yes.
Actually, it's really funny because the very first interview I had when this book came out, and it's before you learn how to talk about your own book, which is a little weird, but I feel like one of the most exciting things about going on book tour, having a book come out and being interviewed generally is the book you've written, but you don't have the first clue about the book that other people have read, and no two people read the same book. So the very first interview I had happened to be one of those big ones, which you never want to have first, but it was Mary Louise Kelly on NPR, and she was just like, I hate it! And she just like, so the whole interview, all I'm thinking is like, wait, why did she hate Ken so much? And I couldn't practically concentrate on anything else because she came sort of out of the gate so hard on disliking Ken. And Ken is not a classically likable character, but I actually feel that I feel very compassionately towards Ken. He is by far and away the most wounded character in the book. He lost his mother as a little boy, whereas his sister was an infant at the time. The mother died shortly after childbirth. And then the father, who's, as you know, bipolar and funny and marvelous, but also very much an absentee father much of the time. And, women come and go from his life. And then, he has this misplaced, adoration and sort of smothers his sister until she finally pushes him away. And so in all of this, I don't know, I actually felt a great deal of compassion, and I will say, as a writer, as I write into characters, you know, you become more and more compassionate as you understand why they are doing the things that they're doing. I mean, no one's just, as you said, like, you know, no heroes and villains, like that's just not that interesting, that's not who we are, and who amongst us hasn't said or done something we've regretted or something that's terrible, and all these characters do those kind of things, and in a family especially, you're sort of muddling through to figure it out. So with your characters, it sounds like you had role models for them, but then they quickly became their own people, or how does that work for you? If you're using loosely your sister and your neighbors.
So for me, it was an interesting process because I had started to write about my family as a memoir.
Okay.
And I quickly realized I don't have enough of a story. Like I said, everything had sort of taken place off stage for us. I didn't know my sister, and so to write about my parents, you sort of like didn't, I mean, it had a huge effect on my sister and me, but it didn't have enough action, enough story. So when I decided to write about these sisters, I thought, I'll make it so that not only are they dealing with these annoying neighbors, and so it became a real interesting process for me because I was able to use a lot of the stuff I had written in the memoir and change it, because in the fictional version, it's very different. It takes place in the 70s. The backstory takes place in the 70s, and during the disability movement, disability rights movement, which was a time when, especially with the parents, were really fighting for inclusion and disability rights, national disability rights. So in the book, it's very different. Their sister Eleanor is the middle sister, and she has cerebral palsy and a severe seizure disorder, but she lives at home. So the whole family revolves around Eleanor, and especially Louise, the mom, is very much about including Eleanor in everything, to almost the exclusion, the irony being the exclusion of the two Well daughters. And there's, when you grow up in a family, as I did, where, my sister had died by the time I was sort of conscious, but my parents were really involved in Fernald, and after Cheryl died, they would have all their meetings at our house, and people would come to talk about, different fundraisers and different things. And most of those people, all their kids were still alive. They were, to use the parlance of the day, retarded, but they were, my parents were still very involved. And so when you grow up in an environment where parents are coming to your house and sobbing about what will happen to their kids when they're gone, that's kind of a different way of growing up. And when you grow up like that, it has a name now, and it's called well child syndrome. And that is when kids grow up in a household where there's either been, a sick child or special needs child, and the well children, you can't have any problems because your parents have enough to deal with. And so that's how my sister and I really grew up. I became very independent at a young age, and my parents were great. They were fine people and they were good parents. And it was also, I think you also write in this time frame, the benign neglect of the 70s. So a very different parenting style. So part of it was the benign neglect in the 70s, and part of it was that they were grieving and they were kind of absent. And unless you were bleeding or had a really big problem, which, most of the time, if I was bullied, that wasn't considered a big problem. We didn't really talk about or burden them with stuff because they had so much to bear. And you also don't feel entitled to your feelings. Like if you're kind of, hey, pay attention to me, you kind of don't feel entitled to that either. So that's what the sisters, that's why they're, there wasn't much to get in the family, and so they really had a very separate sense of.
But so was it in the writing forward that the sister took on other, that she started as your sister, but you said you fictionalized her and she became someone quite different. So that was just as you wrote on. Yeah,
I mean, very quickly I went from, having it be, the yoga people are essentially completely real. I don't think I made up anything since I changed names. Don't tell anyone that, but I don't tell the lawyers that. But with my sister, it really was, it sort of started with a little bit of an essence, and then just went very, very much fictionalized from there.
And honestly, I think that's how character usually works. Like you might have some idea as you're starting to write of who this person is, but honestly, until you write pretty far into it and you figure out what they do for work and you figure out sort of, then you see them reacting in these different situations and so on, and they become sort of fully fledged. And I remember when I was an editor and people would be like, oh yeah, you know, now my character just started talking to me, and I remember just being like, oh, come on. And of course now I'm like, oh yeah, I see. I see that they just become very, very, very real, and in your daydreams and when you're just sort of figuring out what they do. So if you only reveal this little tip of the iceberg of your character on the page, you actually, as the author, have to know so much.
I love that. I've never heard that. I love that.
Yeah. No, I mean, because I think,
you have to know everything
you know,
below
so
too.
even just the flip comments they make, you only can make those kind of flip comments when you know their whole past and how they would respond to a sister different from the neighbor and so on. So I think that that's just part of it, because people always ask when you're writing a novel, and I have this easy out because I was like, I've written a memoir. If I wanted to write, you know, about my family, I would have done it. But, you know, they assume that, you know, all the people are based on your people. And the fact is, you know, they so quickly, even if you, that was, but whether you get your inspiration from someone in real life or just from the idea of a person, it changes so much and so quickly as you write, I think.
It does.
Yeah.
So you wrote a novel first, and then
Yes.
you wrote a memoir,
Yes.
and then you wrote this.
Yes.
How do you know, talk a little bit about the difference between, for you, between writing a memoir and between writing fiction?
Yeah.
Was one easier, was one harder?
I would say that, you know, in the obvious way, memoir is easier simply because you know the point of view, you know the perspective, you know essentially the facts of the book, and you know the characters. Now, obviously, you still need to do a ton of research, and you still need to walk in some of those other characters' shoes in order to make them really in-depth and vibrant and everything else. But you know all the pieces, whereas like fiction, my God, fiction, it can be absolutely anything. On any page, someone can get pregnant, stub their toe, drop dead. You know, for people who have a hard time making decisions, and I'm one of those, I'm like, ah, you know, there's just almost too much. So then as soon as you latch on to a few things, like a structure, like, you know you're gonna have the sisters together, you know, there's the sister who died, like whatever. So in my case, as I was, you know, I think when I started writing, and I'm actually, because I haven't started my next project, I'm curious to how you've started this one, but when I started this book, I feel like what I do is I kind of notice what I notice, or in that sort of Mary Oliver, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. I mean, you know, you start watching when you're taking a walk, where your brain just keeps alighting and keeps alighting. And with me, it was in that weird time of 2016, which I just felt there was this moody, crazy, anxious period in the country that I remember when I was living it, feeling I knew I wanted to write more about Cape Cod, and then it was siblings, but I didn't really know who they were or what I was after at that point. And then it wasn't until, I don't even remember the start of this question, but I'm just going with it. It wasn't, okay, yes. It wasn't until I sort of got my hooks into the structure, which I actually sort of figured out by reading Cain and Abel. And of course I thought I was going to find out so much about siblings from this archetypal, you know, story. But in fact, it's like 3 sentences, right? You know, they give gifts. God liked this one. That one's pissed. Kills this, you know. But in that way, I thought, okay, these kids are going to give their parent, their father, a gift. And so it just created this movement towards this moment that I wanted, even though I hadn't figured out a lot else. But no, fiction, it is truly, I mean, it's such a cliche, but you are building the plane while you're flying it. You're, you know, putting together some bridge across some vast canyon, hoping to get to the other side, and sort of writing into the mystery and, you know, hoping to touch something bigger than yourself.
We are sisters, because I was just, when I'm writing the past 2 novels I wrote, I would get to about 2/3 of the way in and just go, oh no, like now what? And I call it landing the plane. It's like you get the plane in the air and it's flying, and now you're like, uh-oh, how do I get it down?
Yeah.
How are all the pieces going to come together? How is it all going to fit? And I think it is just such every time I do it, and I didn't do it I took a long break between books, but a long time ago, these new books I feel like it's a blender, and I put these things in there, and there's going to be sisters, there's going to be a dead sister, there's going to be yoga people, there's going to be poetry, weird poetry from next door, and then like press and see, I don't know, and it is a very, I think it was Neil Doctor who said, you can drive.
It's like in the fog and the rain and everything else.
Only seeing 3 feet ahead of you, but you can get all the way across the country that way. I mean, no one wants to, but that's what writing a novel is like.
And I do think there's this moment too, when the writing is going really well, when you're sort of in it, as opposed to trying to get into it or really trying to figure out, it's like everything folds into that moment. So the conversation you overhear, something you read, something your kid says, like it just, the music, the sound of the ocean, whatever it is, it all sort of starts feeding into it. I don't know what I'm doing, my little sticky tie, but it starts feeding into it. And then there's just this beautiful kind of crazy logic of your subconscious that kicks in. And you see that more when you're done, when you read and you see all these threads that you kind of weren't even aware that you've done all of it. Because you're just in that zone, which is such a fun place to be. Are you there yet?
So, after this one came out, I started another novel, and I submitted it to publishers. It's like a partial, which means like 120 pages. It has yet to sell, so, not a good feeling. We love it, but you have to write the whole thing. So I now then started, in my annoyance, I started another one, which I am now almost finished with, because it's about publishing, and so my next question was going to be, you and I both have publishing backgrounds. I worked for Random House for 10 years, and then I started to write my own novels, and then I had writer's block, and then I ghost wrote a lot of people's books, and then I went back to my own work. And you also had a publishing background, and then became a writer. So we kind of know how the sausage is made, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And I wonder, sometimes it's a really good thing because we understand, it's not personal. And then other times, that whole sense of marketing and what the business gets in the way. I was just wondering how you feel about knowing the business from the inside.
Well, I feel like even though I know it, it's still such a complete mystery to me most of the time. I mean, what I feel like is I know the books I published and what I was trying to do and how I tried to make them work, but I don't have a sense of sort of the overall, and also it keeps switching, like, ebooks and now audiobooks are such a big part of the sales and how it all works. I don't know. I find it pretty mysterious, and why one thing connects so much more powerfully. Like you'll be like, yes, this is, but I don't know.
Yeah, I worked at the last part of my publishing career, which spanned, some of us weren't born then, but 1985 to 1995, and the business was really, really different, pre-social media, pre.
Yeah.
And I mean, I worked at Knopf my last few years, which is the kind of jewel in the crown of, at the time, it was the jewel in the crown of Random House, very, very literary, and we'd have these meetings, and these books would come out, and some books they could really make work, and other books, like, you'd think it was going to work, and just nothing happened, and so it's a real mystery, like, no one, and so when you talk to people, and they're trying, I do some coaching, and when you talk to people, and writers start to say, well, I'm going to try to write, a romance because why? Because you want to write a romance? No, because it's going to sell. Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
You'll never, by the time you're done, romances won't be, Colin Hoover will be, no one will be interested in that. And so you have to really write from what you're interested in most, because you cannot second guess, matter what you think you know.
It's so true. And then I think there's a lot of this, I've noticed that, horse books are big, so I'm going to put a horse in, and you're just like, that is not, or sometimes hooking it to a contemporary event, it just never works quite as well. And it is a mystery. I mean, because it's such in the same way that what I was saying before about we all read different books, I mean, haven't we all had the experience where there's some big hit book and you read it and you're like, I don't know, or you read part of it. And then 5 years later, you read it and you're like, oh my God, I get it. And I feel like we're all ready for different books at different times. And yeah, I don't think the publishing industry necessarily, I mean, I think the formulaic stuff, certainly, the more genre, they can sort of figure it out. But with literary fiction, I don't think they ever know what's going to hit or not. I mean, you know, everyone hopes, but I should have had, when I was an editor, all bestsellers.
Where were you?
Houghton Mifflin, Harcourt and then Houghton Mifflin. But again, a long while back, and literally, I mean, I remember, you know, these were smaller publishing houses, they weren't part of the big five, but, you know, sitting around a table with a bunch of editors and like making our case for why we loved a certain book so much. And, you know, it was just a really different time.
And it's really subjective. I mean, anyone who's in a book club,
Yeah.
I'm not, but anyone who's in a book club knows. Yeah, you know, 5 people love it and 5 people hate it, and you've just read the same book.
Yeah.
So it's, are there writers in the audience?
Oh, yes,
there are. Should we keep talking? Are there questions?
Yeah,
Should we see if there's questions, or?
Yes, if anyone has.
We can always go back to
We
talking.
can- we
if
can
there's-
keep talking, but if anyone has a
No
question,
pressure,
that
but
would
if
be-
anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Yes.
It's,
Oh, me? I was really captivated when you talked about you started a novel and then you stopped and you started another one about publishing because it's difficult to do that. I'm wondering about the extent to which, how can I say this, your writing is part of your process. In other words, do you use your writing to work out your own development, or is it like you're just writing that's something on this, it's all encapsulated, or is it something else?
That's a great question. Did everybody hear it? Is writing part of the process of kind of working things out, or is it kind of a separate thing? I think it's both. A lot of the times, for me, sometimes I just get an idea for a novel. Usually it's what you said, pretty much. It's like you start to notice what you're noticing, and you start to notice what you're interested in writing about. So usually it's a novel, you know, the one I started a few months ago that has not sold, is, you know, kind of another midlife novel about a woman who's divorced and blah, 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 because that's, I'm not divorced, but, sorry. But anyway, so that's like the topic that I'm interested in looking at. With all the usuals, put the stuff in the blender and see what happens. And when that didn't work, it hasn't worked yet, and I mean, I will finish it, but when you're someone who needs an advance, you can't just write for a year with no advance. So I quickly became, part of what's frustrating about the publishing business is like, you know, you have a book out and it gets pretty good reviews and you think, oh, I'll just sell the net. No. So then you have to constantly rejigger and reinvent yourself. And so part of the frustration, and I've been in the business for so long now that it is almost only frustration. You know, and if you expect anything else from it, really you should go into a different business. But so I was, you know, scrolling and I noticed something going on social media, and these 2 different authors were having at different times during the year, were having these like fan weekends. And I became just fascinated by it. And I was like, okay.
fan weekends?
Author weekends.
Okay.
And that's, my next book is called The Author Weekend. And people are going to die. Agent story. It's going to be kind of a funny, dark, you know, publishing-based, you know, kind of thing. Because now, of course, it's a cathartic situation where I'm just so annoyed. I love my agent, but I just mean, you know, all the annoyances that you go through in the business now have an outlet. So, but usually it is a bigger, I mean, that is, I think, a fun story to tell, but usually it is a book like this where it's an issue or a period of life or situation that I want to explore.
And if I were to take on the same question in terms of, you know, is writing part of the process of writing? Yes. No, but in terms of figuring it out, I would say yes. I do a lot of thinking before I ever start to write. I mean, I'd say there's sort of 6 months or a year of just kind of thinking about it, wandering around, it being in my mind, sort of sorting out, like, it's usually a situation that I'm intrigued by, and then how would that work? Where would the characters be? Where would we be set up geographically? But at some point, you do have to start writing to sort through it, just to see what's working or not. I mean, I suppose some people could do an extensive outline or something like that. I'm not really an outliner, I'm more intuitive, so that's when, or an intuitive writer, so that's when that part of it kicks in for me. I just, I kind of have to push in and see where the roadblocks are and figure it out. Other questions?
Yes, I have one. So I think we've all read books where the authors are trying too hard to be funny, and it's just so lame. It really is. It's like, oh my gosh, both of your books have wonderful humor in them. And I'm thinking that authors must have a lot of confidence for their jokes, their scenes to land. Did it take you a while to develop that confidence?
Oh, we are so confident, aren't we?
Who's saying anything about confidence?
I mean, I actually don't quite know how to answer that, other than it's when I feel like it's when at least the humor that I found in this book is from the characters and what their take is and their style and who they are in the world, and then how they see the world in these funny ways. I mean, I don't approach it thinking, I want to write a book that has, I mean, I'm actually always a little bit surprised when people do, and I am grateful for you, to you for saying that, but I don't think of myself as like I'm going to set out to write either a comedic novel or a novel where there's a lot of funny stuff, but there are some funny moments and funny characters, and just the way it is in life. I mean, I love writing about it and thinking about it, but again, it's a little more intuitive than intentional.
When the yoga people moved in upstairs, we were so deeply annoyed. I mean, there were people coming and going all day on the street, but it's purely residential. There's no businesses. Don't worry, I could go down this rabbit hole forever. I'm still angry. It was like 4 years ago. But I knew at the time, I was like, just like you said, I was like, okay, I'm not a big God person, but I did say, like, God has sent the yoga people because they're going to be like, I have to write about them now. Like, I have to write about the situation. And I think, humor, I never really understand how it happens. Sometimes it doesn't land. Sometimes, I think when I was younger and I sort of was setting out to write wry comedic novels, I often was criticized that my humor was mean, and I think that's another female, they look at female writers, and unless you're British, then you're just so clever. But if you're an American female writer writing funny things, oh, you're very mean, they don't like your characters, you're just nasty. The British, but I did kind of, when I wrote Separation Anxiety, it was like a 14-year gap between my fourth novel and Separation Anxiety, which was published a long time later. And by the time I got there, taking care of both my parents who had died, I had a lot of stuff that had happened in those years. And I found that my humor had changed in the sense of my writing humor changed. That if there were going to be any jokes in the book, which of course there weren't, but they were going to be at the main character's expense. They were going to be at her expense, not at other people. And I guess that was a little bit kowtowing to the criticism, but I also felt in my personal life, I felt that you think certain things were everything's funny, sort of, but I didn't want to be mean or to be possibly perceived as mean. I feel like people are just struggling so much that if there was going to be any joke, it is usually, with me, it's always at my own expense in real life, and I try to do that in the books too.
And that's just good memoir tip too, by the way, is be harder on yourself than anyone in your book. Yeah.
I'm interested in this idea of having an empathetic or a not empathetic character. So when you said that you heard people who were just outraged at how unempathetic Hannah was, and some of that might also to really how conscious are you when you're writing of trying to balance or not balance or be aware of the effect on the reader in terms of empathy for any characters, and how much does that play in how you want to balance the characters, or whether or not that's an important aspect of the book. I just finished reading a book in which the main character was 100% not empathetic. And it was hard to stay in there, and the author thought it would be some reward in the end. But it made me think about this question and how much you're conscious and unconscious about the degree to which the reader receives the idea of that character being empathetic. In terms of just formulating the character.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I think about it when I'm formulating the characters. I mean, they are who they are, and if some of, I mean, it's funny because, again, one or two people really thought Ken was too unlikable. It didn't come up whether he was not empathetic or not, but it was sort of if he was too unlikable. But a lot of people really felt his pain and thought he was likable. So again, I think the reader plays into that too. But I don't think, I mean, at this point in my writing career, I don't tailor characters or plot even or anything particularly to who I imagine is going to read it. I mean, that sounds very like, I don't know, literary high-mindedness or something, and I don't mean it that way, but I write the book that I'm involved in writing, and I don't, during that phase of it, I'm not really thinking, oh, is someone going to be offended by Ken not being nice or that type of thing. Obviously when you get to the end and you're sort of having people read your book and trying to sort of see if it's all working, I mean, I would listen if someone just said, I could not get beyond this horrible character or something, but I haven't had that happen.
Yeah, I think, you, especially in this book, with Ken, when I came out of the mentioning Ken, it was more like you were able to draw him ultimately in a very compassionate, and I think to answer your question, I do think about it sometimes. I mean, like you, I don't go into it, trying to create some people are gonna like. But I think just the way I write now, it's less of a novel, more of a story, it's like a story. And so in real life, there are a lot of people who are really annoying and difficult to deal with. And yet if you understand them, and you understand that's always, from the time I was working the graveyard shift at IHOP on Somersfield Road, right? You would meet these people and you would hear their story, and suddenly it was so fascinating. I just got so fascinated in people's stories and what made them. And so, yeah, Lydia, for instance, is, maybe she's on the spectrum, or maybe she has some social, or she's just weird, whatever. But, if you understand what's going on between the two of them and how they grew up, it makes more sense. And so you can treat them with that kind of compassion, and, hopefully your reader will see that and will find them interesting, even though they can be, off-putting or unlikable in certain ways.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions. I have another question.
Okay.
So both of you are Massachusetts-based and writing about Cambridge and writing about Cape Cod. So this obviously informs your writing. Is it much easier to do that, or do you have to make sure that you do a lot of research, even though you live there? What's the place?
So it's writing living here, being in Massachusetts, and one of the things I loved about the book was how you told it from all these different perspectives, and even though Cape Cod didn't actually have a voice, it felt like a character, it felt like such a place, and I wanted to do that with Cambridge as well. I mean, I grew up in Newton, and then I lived in New York for 10 years, and so I think my first novel or 2 novels or 3 novels were set in New York, and then I went to DC and one was set there. I feel like place, I think for you too, is very much a part of, and coming from, I grew up in Newton, but growing up in Boston, and being back, I've been back for almost 20 years. I moved back to Newton by accident, and then now I live in Cambridge, but the Massachusetts, the whole Massachusetts personality, I love, and the accent and all the different issues about being from here. I just love it. So the novel that hasn't sold, I would forever refer to it as the novel that hasn't sold yet, but that one is set in Gloucester, and I have spent time in Gloucester, and that is such a particular vibe, as Salem is a particular vibe, as the Cape, and so each place has a really different vibe, and I just love New England. I love Massachusetts, and I love it, and so to go, and so I've done a lot of research about Gloucester, and I've spent time there, and I lived there for a while, and whatever, but, and there isn't just one Gloucester, there's different parts of Gloucester, so, you like to live on this side, or there's Annisquam, or there's, the Rockport area, and then there's Gloucester, and within that there's different, so.
I mean, I 100% agree. I kind of could use the same little iceberg, analogy or metaphor for place too. I mean, you have to know these places really well in order to just show the little bit that you're going to show. And in terms of the Cape, I mean, I think to people who don't live or don't know the Cape, it's sort of this one amorphous arm that's beachy and touristy or something. And yet, if you know it well and research it and explore it and so on, I mean, Provincetown is to Chatham what like Las Vegas is to Boston. Like there is nothing in common. And research is such a fun part of writing too. I mean, I gave my characters, I happen to be obsessed with whales, so I know a lot about whales already, but I mean, the most fun part of writing in this book was just doing a huge deep dive on humpbacks, and like my effort was like not to shoehorn every fact I had into this book and be like, okay, what's the best fact? Okay, it's that they have pink milk or whatever it is. You kind of pick. But I do think research is really important in fiction writing as well, whether that's geography or the jobs or all of it.
The other thing I'll add, because of my book was set in Massachusetts vis-a-vis Fernald, which I don't know if everybody knows that Fernald was the state hospital in Waltham. And so, having it nearby, the irony for me was that I had moved back to Boston, to Newton at the end of 2001. My parents were both still alive, and I could have, for years and years and years, driven over to Fernald and driven the campus and gone into the buildings and gone into where, the building that my sister lived in. And just because I wasn't ready. I felt I had lived in the shadow of her death for so long. I wasn't interested, and of course, both my parents died. And then sometime after that, I'm like, I want to go look at Fernald. And it was 2014, and like a month before, they had shut it down. They had already sold it to the town of Waltham, the city of Waltham. And it was, as my niece would say, literally closed. Like I was trespassing. I managed to get on the campus, and then I was chased off by a cop. And I was like, the irony, like why did I wait so long? But we're only ready when we're ready. But growing up in the Boston area, everybody knew someone in Fernald. Everybody knew, Carolyn Levitt, the author, she volunteered there. Eileen Miles, the poet, she worked there. Everyone that I met, like when I worked at IHOP, people had people that were, again, in the parlance of the day, retarded was, my cousin's retired and he lived there. So everyone had a story, and so when you grow up here, and one of the other things I love in Nellis Stop is how all the supermarkets have programs for developmentally disabled people you don't see that in other states. I mean, you don't see it. And Market Basket has it, and Shaw's has it, and it's just it's always been something that I feel distinguishes Massachusetts in that way. So that was a great thing to have be part of the book.
Thank you so much.
Is there something else you want to
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. Well, I do have to, on a personal note, you mentioned 2016.
Yes.
And no matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, that was an interesting year, and it has been, with COVID and everything else, right up to 2023. My sister is coming to visit. My family is estranged over that. She's coming next week, so I want you all to wish me luck. That might be a good topic to at least a short story. Who knows?
You can get a couple of books.
Yeah,
wonderful, whether or not you're a writer. I mean, you just take away so many things. Thank you for your candor and your humor. And I also want to say that, Laura, I read your book. I actually read it. And Adrienne, I listened to your book on Audible. And Ken, I thought was pretty spot on. Kind of annoying, I don't know. But anyway, it was really a great narration. There were several narrators. So no matter how you want to absorb these books, it's great either way. So a big shout out to our sponsors, supporters, and partners who help us keep the Lit Fest free. The Salem Athenaeum, the Salem Public Library, the Salem Cultural Council, Peabody Essex Museum, Wicked Good Books, right over there, Salem 5, we're in their building, Copper Dog Books, Cinema Salem, Salem Academy Charter School, the House of the Seven Gables, Salem Maritime National Historic Site, Essex National Heritage, Theater in the Open, readers like you who donate to the festival. Speaking of you, thank you very much for being here and asking good questions and supporting these authors. Do buy their books. You've been signing some of them, and perhaps you can stay for a few minutes to sign more. Immediately following this session, you will be signing right here in the Salem 5 Community Room. And then, if you just want to order the books online or go to the physical bookstore, Wicked Good Books, you can do that too. It's all up to you. We hope you'll stay for our other great panels. And actually, we're going right through the weekend. Tomorrow on Sunday, we start at 11 with an audio panel, speaking of listening to Audible. Authors who narrate. It's virtual. So if you just want to stay home and have a cup of coffee, put up your feet. That's going to be a good one. Included in that panel, too, I want to say, is Stephanie Willing. And the name may not mean that much to you, but she actually narrated Hank Philippi Ryan's new book, which you can buy over there as well. And Hank will be joining us this afternoon, just kind of a coincidence there. Next, at 1 o'clock in, oh my goodness, 30 seconds, Gathering and Connecting, Italian Heritage as Creatives Touchstone. Well, thank you all again. Hope you'll stay or want to come back and do that too. We're here, I think, until 7 at night. So.